Greetings, intrepid system failure listeners. Nate here, accompanied by my esteemed brother Brian for another episode of the Old System Failure Podcast, this being numero 89. Pretty exciting, Brian. We're going to draw ever closer to the century mark, so that's exciting. We're going to have to do something fun for the century shelf. I'll have to think to myself what that could be as we draw closer. How you doing this week, Brian?
I'm pretty good, Nate. How are you?
In pretty good shape myself. We have a jam-packed episode today, but the podcast circuit was just a little bit barren this week. You know, we had, for whatever reason, we just had banger pod after banger pod that we could clip up and bring on here to share with everybody. But there just hasn't been an episode worthy of our ministrations this week. But that's okay, because I can definitely talk enough to provide a little podcast content of my own. So the agenda for today, I think we'll start out. We'll talk about Mr. Kanye West and his ridiculous Nazi music that's come out here, and the nature of his artistic expression. I have a quote from Will and Ariel Durant that I think is quite amusing about Dante's Divine Comedy, and the Divine Comedy being the poem that contains the Inferno. The first third of that poem is the Inferno, one of the most exciting pieces of literature in human history. So I'll read the Durant's quote on that, which I think is pretty interesting. Then we have a Wall Street Journal article about the downfall of Herr Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. I just found this article to be howlingly funny. I think our system failure audience will agree. And then for the meat of the content on this podcast, there was an interesting Reddit thread. I went to Reddit, when there weren't really any podcasts worthy of our discussion this week, other than this podcast. I started searching for Reddit for some ideas, and what I came up with was this TIL about, of all things, the Golden Age of Piracy. So we're going to talk about the Golden Age of Piracy, the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the transition from feudalism to capitalism, the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. We have just way too many things to talk about. So I suppose, without further ado, Brian, we should dive into the peculiar case of Mr. Kanye West, huh?
All right, let's do it.
So Kanye has a new album, or he has a new song out. I assume this is the single for an upcoming album, Brian. Do you know if that's true? That's usually how it works, right? You got a album that's going to drop in a few weeks, so you can drop a single or two off of it to try to tease some interest?
What I heard is that an album got dropped, but I don't have Spotify, and this album is not getting much mainstream fanfare.
A Spotify subscription is not going to help you listen to Mr. West's new album.
No, it's not on there either.
Yeah, because it is a pro-Nazi album. Like, the man literally is chanting Heil Hitler in his music, which is pretty eyebrow-raising. Hey, Brian?
It sure is.
Now, I have not bothered to listen to this song, but you gave it a listen, didn't you, Brian?
I did.
Now, without endorsement of the neo-Nazi content, was the music any good? Has Kanye lost his musical touch? Do I like the arc of Kanye albums from 808 and Heartbreak, 808s and Heartbreak, up through My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and Yay, and what was the other one? Yeezus, and those were like great albums. They really captured the zeitgeist of, let's say 2008, 2009, right up through 2016, 17. The Life of Pablo came out in 17, and that was maybe the last great Kanye album for me, the one that I really had a relationship with. There's been a few bangers he's rolled out since then, but none of the albums have really blown my top like The Life of Pablo. So how would you rate the music? Now, I'm being very specific here. Is the music up to par, Brian? Again, this assessment of Kanye's music is not freighted with an endorsement of neo-Nazi content.
The music's fine.
The music is fine. All right. Well, would you say that so that's really how I would describe Ye's past few albums, basically them all since Life of Pablo. Yeah, it's fine.
Well, all right. Well, one thing that he could have done. I mean, he's like a Christian fellow, right? He could have been the hook could have been praise Jesus instead of Heil Hitler.
I mean, that would seem a little more positive, eh?
Well, I guess. Some of the lyrics are, despite all the fame and money, I still can't see my children, and I feel like I'm stuck in the Matrix. And then so Heil Hitler is the chorus.
Yeah, jeez, yeah.
And so I mean, our Ye there is obviously struggling with the despair, and so should we begrudge Ye for in his despair, saying Heil Hitler? I mean, I guess.
Yeah, well, maybe we should.
Well, I mean, I think the song, what is art? I mean, well, you talk about Michelangelo's, statue all the time, and he's taken that, clay or whatever and molded it into how he sees it. And Kanye is obviously in a lot of despair, and I think a lot of people are in a lot of despair, and so. I mean, it is like an honest artistic expression. Yeah. But is that good? Well, no, probably not.
Yeah.
One thing is The Wall, the venerable Pink Floyd album, like the third greatest selling album of all time.
Yeah, the great rock opera.
I mean, obviously flirts with fascism, but there's obviously a lot of awareness in it.
Well, it portrays fascism as this brutal, oppressive force, along with Roger's mom and his school teacher, right? It compares fascism with those figures in his life. It blurs the lines. The teacher kind of has fascist tendencies, so does the mom.
Well, the story takes a turn for a dark fascist turn, when the protagonist, amidst his isolation, he's like a rock star, and, the doctors come and dope him up so he can get through the show, and then things take a dark fascist turn. And it's obviously result of the pain that he's been dealing with his whole life, and losing his dad, and the echoes of World War II and whatnot. Kanye West was doing this interview with Aiden Ross, and he was saying I think Hitler would love me if he were alive today, which seems improbable.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that fits with Hitler's stated ethic, but okay.
Well, I mean, it seems delusional, and I don't think that Roger Waters, the writer of The Wall, has any delusions about fascism. And so you could say that. Well, The Wall and this Heil Hitler song are maybe trying to express something similar, but The Wall is kind of much less delusional, I guess. And I mean, obviously, Kanye is in a world of hurt, and so that way I feel for him. But the song is an expressive, or it's an artistic expression of pain, no doubt. So I don't know. That's what it is.
Yes. Okay. So your first point there was that art is this act of perception that you can then package in a way that other people can see what you're seeing. So art is this way of it's almost like an act of communication. And the thing that fascinates me about Kanye's song is the immune response that it gets. I mean, there is a good point to be made here that our corporate entities, the ones that run the music industry, the big wigs over at Spotify and the big record labels, these guys have no problem pumping out music that talks about violence towards black people and uses, the N-word freely. No problem pumping that stuff out. I remember during the 90s, there was some kerfuffle raised by Tipper Gore about putting those parental advisory stickers on gangster rap albums. But the companies themselves were happy to publish this music. You did not see the immune response towards the gangster rap of NWA of the late 80s and early 90s. You didn't see the immune response to that you see to this. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the current version of America, the current society we live in, Daryl Cooper calls the World War II and the story of the Allies versus Hitler as the foundational myth of our current society, or he uses the term load-bearing myth, like a load-bearing column, in a construction or an architecture. And when you attack that load-bearing myth, it just encourages that immune response, that outsider versus insider immune response. And I remember when we were growing up in the 90s, I would never have dreamed of using the N-word. That just seemed it was that's a word that racist people use, and the worst thing you could be in this version of America, which sacrificed to contribute to the toppling of the Third Reich in the 40s. to us, like, being a racist is like being anti-American, being the opposite of being what an American would be. So, like, we're growing up in the 90s, we would never use a word like the N-word. Like, we'd never that puts you in this, like, out-group, this anti-American out-group almost. And, like, but we use the word, like, retard all the time. Like, it was nothing. Like, it was just, like, almost like, that was, like, the word that for the people who had, all of these genetic disorders that used to be called retarded back in the day. Now it's a pejorative, right? And there's, like, people who say, well, that's a hurtful word. We don't want to allow people, we don't want people using that word in a casual, like calling their friends retarded, which is what we did all the time in, like, the 90s, right? But now we want to, people love conversational superiority. I think a large part of this, the reason why, the part where it's, like, okay for gangster rappers to rap the N-word, to be screaming it over the radio waves, but white people should never say it. Like, we just felt bad about the fact that our ancestors had imported so many black Africans and enslaved them for generations that we were like, yeah, we can live with that. I don't mind if whitey's not allowed to use the N-word. Whatever other people are saying, that seemed appropriate at the time. But then, the trouble there is that you're giving the syllables, like, magical power, like the utterance of the actual syllables, right? And you're not at all considering the freight of meaning with which these words are being loaded. And when you consider, like, when you focus on the magic of the syllables rather than the intent with which the words are being bandied about, well, then you really end up in a place where people can correct other people. And we just love that. I mean, there's nothing finer than correcting someone. Oh, excuse me, that's not the preferred nomenclature. You should be using this word. And I think that we've gotten a large, like, the N-word template is being applied to, like, other words in, like, an attempt to control people's language. And it's just, we really should have always been focused on what we don't want. It's not that we don't want people uttering certain magical syllables. What we don't want is people generalizing entire, races or entire ethnic groups, based on stereotypes, right? That's where the harm comes in. That's the practice that we should have been condemning, not focused on specific syllables. So, I don't know. Kanye's a man who, his whole thing is, like, he believes in this force of personality so much that he can take that which is extremely unpopular and make it popular. Two of his preceding examples was gospel music, right? Kanye grew up with a single mom and went to church a lot. He really loved that gospel music, and he wove the gospel music into his hip-hop beats and created a synthesis that's really something else. It's really something to behold. That's what I always loved about Kanye's early music. He was able to use the gospel, the kind of uncool, churchy gospel music to great effect. Well, the other thing he did was the polo shirts, like pink polo shirts with the popped collars, like maybe multiple polo shirts. Remember that was popular for a hot minute in the late 2000s, thanks to Kanye's influence. So it's like, now this man thinks that he can, like, use his force of personality to embrace neo-Nazism and chanting Heil Hitler on his music. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to do it. And as mentioned, I haven't even bothered to listen to the song because it's so distasteful to the way that it's just, my sensibilities just reject it. The immune response, I'm part of the immune response to this song. And it is the immune response that is so interesting here. Because especially in view of the events of October 7th, 2023 and what's gone on since then. Because our main man Dave Smith always loves to point out that, like, the lesson of World War II is always trotted out as the justification for every ill-advised military intervention that the United States has involved itself in since World War II. It's like Milosevic in Serbia. Yeah, he must be the new Hitler. Gaddafi's the new Hitler. Saddam Hussein, the new Hitler. And you hear the comparisons between Hamas and Hitler now today, as if these people are just as if Hamas is unworthy of consideration, and that they're anti-Semitic to their core. And you also hear anti-Semitism being used to excuse or defend the actions of the Israeli government. So we really are in a strange language game here, where we use the ethos of the Allied liberators of the racist Nazi regime as a way of closing down certain avenues of conversation. And so it's interesting to see that immune response. Again, I feel like the fact that I haven't listened to this song makes me a part of this immune response. But as an act of perception, right, as a work of art, you brought up Michelangelo's David a few minutes ago and saved me the trouble, Brian. So as an act of perception, I don't know, I'll be interested to see if Kanye truly does have the force of personality to pull this off, or will he live the rest of his life as a pariah?
I think B.
B. Well, one thing is for sure, the current regime, with it, including the intellectual fencing that keeps us out of forbidden areas is collapsing. And it's interesting to see Kanye boldly wandering into these taboo territories, as if, and the risk here really is, like you're saying, he's just going to be a pariah for the rest of his career. It's very, very interesting. It does seem like we are due for a reconsideration of the cultural milieu that has dominated America in the post-war era. And so I think it's very interesting just to follow along with what's going on with Kanye at a distance here, just to see if times really are changing or not.
Well, I mean, I guess I hope that, Ye expressing his pain or whatever, ends well for him somehow.
Yeah. Maybe there'll be some redemption arc here, something like that. Maybe you're saying.
It seems hard to imagine. But that would be my hope, though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are you anything more on the unfortunate case of Mr. Kanye West, or shall we pivot? Speaking of the times changing, shall we pivot to the disgrace and humiliation of Herr Klaus Schwab out there in Germany?
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. So, as our system failure audience may or may not be aware, we all know the man Klaus Schwab. We all know the World Economic Forum. They meet every January out there in Davos, and it's not like the World Economic Forum. They're not a corporation in the sense that they buy and sell products. They don't they don't distribute goods or services. What they do is they arrange this meeting between all of the big banks and the top corporations in the world out there at Davos. So this Wall Street Journal article I've greatly condensed this article down to try to spend as little time reading as possible, but this is great stuff. Now the takeaway here is, the punchline is, this man Klaus Schwab, listen to the way that he behaves, right? And the way that he handles his downfall is like a tantrum. This man is like has all this money and all this influence. He's the guy that trotted out the "you own nothing and be happy" thing. This guy. But despite all the influence and all the power and like the way that this guy really has been like the poster child for the shadowy forces that run the international banking system. It's just amazing that the man is a moron. He's just consumed by ego and utterly ensconced in delusion. It's just amazing.
So this Wall Street Journal article is going to capture his tantrum.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, I can't wait to hear this.
Yes. Okay. Here we go. Now, this article is entitled "The Unraveling of the King of Davos," and the byline, the subtitle is "A Stunning Fall from Grace from World Economic Forum Founder Klaus Schwab came amid threats against board members and allegations of financial impropriety," which he claims. This article, written by the quadrumvirate of Jenny Strasberg, Shalini Ramachandran, Suzanne Vernica, and Anne-Marie Androidis. For decades, Klaus Schwab ruled over Davos like royalty. That reign ended when he hit send on an email to World Economic Forum trustees on a recent Friday afternoon. Schwab was seemingly headed for a graceful exit from the organization he founded more than a half-century ago, after a 2024 investigation by the Wall Street Journal exposed evidence of a toxic culture at the forum for women and black employees. But by Friday, April 18th, the trustees' audit committee recommended opening a probe into a new wave of whistleblower allegations against Schwab and his wife Hilda. Incensed, Klaus Schwab fired off a 2-paragraph message to the board's audit committee, threatening trustees with an investigation into how they were carrying out their duties and accusing them of risking the future of the organization. So last month, Klaus Schwab sent an email that doomed him forever. He can never be. And we'll get to that email at the end.
So the World Economic Forum was racist and sexist. That's what they're saying.
There's been a couple things happened here. Last year, 2024, the Wall Street Journal, they did some investigating journalism and uncovered some impropriety in terms of the way that the World Economic Forum treated its non-European employees and its women who work there, I guess. But then more allegations have come out since then. So Klaus dealt with that last year, but then it came back, as we'll see. The article wears on here, and so it all came to a head over Easter weekend. That the part I just read is what just happened. So we'll go back a little bit in time here. First, a little bit of background about the World Economic Forum here. Bankers and CEOs say they can get more business done during 5 days in Davos than over weeks of frenetic travel. Most of the deal making happens in private suites and meeting rooms, tucked away from journalists and non-profit attendees. The tiered access to hotels, restaurants, and late-night parties is governed by color-coded badges worn around visitors' necks. It fosters a pecking order that keeps VIPs coming back for more. The forum's famous annual Power Jamboree made the quaint Swiss ski town of Davos a household name, helping the nonprofit amass a fortune in luxury properties and cash reserves. Klaus Schwab was its omnipresent host, presiding both over private and public meetings, featuring catchphrases declaring his views on globalization, technology, and geopolitics. So one of those catchphrases would be, "You will own nothing and be happy." And so this all sounds pretty familiar, right? The World Economic Forum, they don't do anything but get other leaders together in this, for this super exclusive party, right? And then they have it's just like a mystery school, right? Where you've got levels of access, you have your baseline initiates, and then the color coded badges work you up this hierarchy. So it's interesting to see that the World Economic Forum copies the old mystery school secret society formula here in terms of a hierarchy of importance.
Yeah, well, the goal of the World Economic Forum is to coordinate the response of leaders, right? And like Trudeau was part of the World Economic Forum, and I think everyone's part of this World Economic Forum.
Yeah. So as we go on here, so former former AG Eric Holder, I think he was Obama's AG for all 8 years. Maybe just part of Obama, but Eric Holder, he's going to be involved here, right? So you're right. All the big names are all involved. It really is like a secret society, one of these banking secret societies with weird levels of access. Okay, so now back to last year's Wall Street Journal investigation. A June the 29th, 2004 Wall Street Journal article based on accounts from dozens of current and former forum employees and other people familiar with the forum's practices reported Schwab had presided over a workplace atmosphere at the forum that was hostile to women and black people, including incidents of sexual harassment, racial discrimination, and pregnancy-related discrimination.
See, I just would think that the World Economic Forum would be like a woke organization, or they would be anti-racist and anti-sexist.
Yeah, you would think that all of that sort of thing would be part of it, but I guess that's just for us plebes and not for the the muckety-mucks that run the world, huh?
I guess so,
or maybe not, according to this article here, because I mean it says here, to your point, some forum corporate partners, including Pfizer and MasterCard, reached out to the organization to ask them about these allegations. The board assigned a committee to oversee the response, headed by AXA CEO Thomas Burbel. We'll hear from Burbel again later. It hired the U.S. law firm Covington and Burling and Swiss law firm Homburger to investigate. The probe, led by former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, a Covington senior counsel, lasted for months. In a March call with forum trustees, Holder recommended personnel changes after the investigation. There was one individual he was adamant about, Schwab's son, Olivier Schwab. Quote, "He needs to leave," Holder told trustees. Holder cited evidence that Olivier had overlooked serious sexual harassment perpetrated by a direct report, a case documented in the Journal's 2024 article, and then misled investigators about his knowledge of the complaints. Klaus Schwab was livid. His daughter, Nicole Schwab, had already left the forum in December. He told trustees that he disagreed with plans to remove his son and threatened to retaliate if they did, according to people familiar with the matter. In heated discussions, trustees worked out a compromise that allowed Olivier Schwab to resign rather than being fired. Okay, so the man throws a tantrum. Right? Yeah, his son is this horrible person, apparently, and the man's in his 90s, he's working on a succession plan, but now the investigation started by Wall Street Journal and continued by the World Economic Forum's board, who hired, Eric Holder and this law firm out the United States to investigate, said, yeah, okay, so it turns out your son's this horrible person and he cannot be your succession plan. The man loses his mind and sends out threatening emails. Now we're back to this year, 2025. The week of March 24th, this is Klaus Schwab's top deputy, Borg Brende. He was like a Norwegian official, like a Norwegian finance minister. In the week of March 24th, his top deputy, Borg Brende, invited Klaus Schwab several times to discuss Brende's reorganization plan for the forum, but Schwab each time gave reasons why he couldn't meet. The plan received board sign-off, and on March 27th, Brenda sent a 3,700-word memo outlining far-reaching changes to the management structure, including executive appointments. Klaus Schwab received the memo along with other employees. It included the departure of his son and reduced responsibilities for 2 of his top lieutenants. The founder blew up at Brenda, arguing that some of the people promoted weren't even ready for responsibility. He complained to Bradbeck Letmans, the vice chairman of the board, that key decisions affecting the future of the forum had been made without consulting him. Bradbeck Letmans wasn't sympathetic and told him he should step down. The clash frustrated trustees, already stunned by Schwab's defense of his son, despite the findings of the independent investigation. So now we're at the point where, like, the board members are like, my dear man, because of this investigation, neither you nor your son can ever work for the Economic Forum again. He lost his mind, and when the board, the guy that's like drafting up the plan is like trying to meet with him all week long, and Klaus Schwab, it's just too busy. I just can't meet with you. I just have a conflict. And so, okay, I guess we're moving ahead with this plan without you then. And then he lost his mind apparently about that. Okay, and so Klaus Schwab's actions here. This is good. About 2 weeks later, a long email hit trustees' inboxes, signed on behalf of current and former employees. So now you have the investigation by Wall Street Journal, you have the internal investigation by the World Economic Forum board, and now you have 2 weeks after Klaus Schwab loses his mind, you get this email from like anonymous whistleblowers. It laid out 11 areas of complaint, ranging from allegations of misuse of forum resources to Klaus Schwab's behavior with female employees, including personal remarks and other communications that made the women uncomfortable, and Olivier Schwab's handling of the sexual harassment issue. The whistleblower letter also alleged that Schwab had misused forum resources and staff in a personal quest to get nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. This was not a WF initiative, but a self-driven effort disguised as organizational work, the letter states. On Good Friday, April 10th, the audit committee, chaired by Buberl, the AXA boss, notified the full board of its intention to open a new investigation into the whistleblower letter's claims. So now this is the second investigation from the WEC board. Klaus Schwab told board members that everything in the letter was false and said the Covington inquiry hadn't substantiated prior allegations against him. Buberl responded that if he had nothing to worry about, Schwab should accept the investigation. Soon after, Schwab let loose his threatening email to the audit committee. That's the email from the top of the article. The committee forwarded the message to the board. Brodbeck Letmans called his longtime friend and had a tough conversation. Schwab tried to explain that it was unacceptable to put him through another inquiry. Brodbeck Letmans disagreed. Schwab followed up Saturday night with a resignation email to the board. Schwab in the email said his legacy is, quote, well established and does not need any further validation. He cited his more than 20 honorary degrees and professorships and wrote, I have received the highest national distinction from numerous countries for my efforts in helping economic developments, reconciliation efforts, and even avoiding war. Schwab's implosion culminated on Easter Sunday with an emergency meeting of the forum's board that went on for around 2 hours. Some trustees spoke up in support of Schwab, but in the end, all trustees agreed that a probe was warranted. Trustees also talked with lawyers over the weekend about needing to move quickly amid worries that Schwab or others, and acting in his interest, might try to destroy evidence. On Monday, April the 21st, the forum issued a statement saying Schwab had decided to step down as chair, effective immediately. The Schwab spokesperson said that Schwab never meant to threaten the board in his April email. He has since filed a criminal complaint against the anonymous author of the whistleblower letter in Switzerland, the spokesman added. There was another part I cut out of the article where Schwab tried to defend himself by saying that he had been knighted by the Queen of England for his efforts at ending apartheid in South Africa. And then, like, the Wall Street Journal pulls up the actual, he got like an honorary knighthood, and like apartheid just had nothing to do with it. The man is a bloviating ego. He has a bloviating ego problem, right? The man is just, his ego is just calcified, and it's gotten to the point where it's getting in the way of running the World Economic Forum. And he just thinks he's this amazing person who should be beyond all of this review of the way that he treats women. And by the way, his wife Hildy, she must be steamed about this, right? Because she's getting hit with she's heavily involved in the misappropriation of World Economic Forum funds. And on top of that, she's got to deal with the fact that her husband is being disgraced for, aggressively pursuing these women in his office and making them uncomfortable. And then his son is even worse, apparently. And that dude, that dude had to be quietly disposed of. So, yeah, it is really amazing to see. The reason this article captured my attention, right, is because, I think about the Curtis Yarvins and the Mark Andreessens and the tech bro people who have such a prominent position in the Donald's cabinet, and how and we heard from Catherine Fitz 2 weeks ago about how the authorities are building up this parallel. They're aware this economic system is doomed, and so they're building up a new system to move us all into when they finally have to pull the plug on this. And it's amazing. All these rich people, all these billionaires think that they exist in a system in which they are at the top of the hierarchy because they have money. And they would like the new system to also put people at the top who have money, right? And so they're trying to figure out how they're aware of the system that that gives them power is the clock is ticking on it. And so they're trying to move us all into a new system, but retain their place of privilege in this new system. And they're breathtakingly incompetent, right? They're morons. They're deluded, right? Despite their billions, they think that the fact that they managed to get billions means that they know something about the world, but they're morons, right? Like Klaus Schwab is just he's like receiving this disgrace at the end of his life, and he just thought he was above it. So it just goes to show you that these people who think they're in control have no idea what's going on, and let's just leave it at that, huh? To quote the great Departed movie.
Pleonexia, is that the word?
Pleonexia, yeah. Wealth addiction.
Is it pleonexia?
Yeah. Like in English, it would be Pleonexia. Pleonexia. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
It's a hell of a drug.
I guess it's I'm shocked to hear that the World Economic Forum is a front for this dude's self-aggrandizement. But so what's the name of the guy who's replaced him? Do you know?
Not sure. We'd have to. I don't think they even mentioned it in the article. This is obviously an ongoing situation, but the World Economic Forum did have a succession plan published according to the Wall Street Journal article back in March. So there should be a name that comes up if you Google it.
It looks like it's this Peter Brabeck.
Oh, okay. So Brabeck Lamont. Yeah, he was in the article. Yeah, that's the guy that told Schwab. He's like, yeah, dude.
So this guy's a former CEO of Nestle, a.k.a. Those purveyors of slavery.
Yeah, Nestle, who admits their slavery in their supply chain. Yikes.
Man. Well, I was listening to... Well, Ian Carroll has taken over for Candace Owens' show.
What?
Well,
I haven't heard this. She's on vacation.
She's birthing a child.
Oh, okay.
And he was just doing this bit about where the food in the supermarkets come from.
What did he have to say? Can you remember any specifics?
He was doing this case study about the whole this fishing that goes off off the coast of Thailand, and it uses slave labor. It was this guy telling this tale about how, I guess he thought he was going to work on this boat, but he actually was bought and he was never going to be paid. And these boats just stay out at sea, and other boats come and restock them and refuel them, and the slaves stay on the ship. And the stuff that your cat food comes from this. It's just this. They're raking the sea floors and making into this sea slurry or whatever, and that's where the if for your pet food, this is where the fish comes from. And it's just a horrifying tale about the terrible conditions that these people live in. And they're beaten and stuff, and it's just actual slavery. And so Thailand, I guess the government cracked down on this, and then so they just moved the industries to Vietnam. And then so the government of Thailand loosened up on this, and I guess it's coming back, and all this cheap fish, and it's just Nestle's just known though for using slave labor and whatnot, and
man, that reminds me of the Little Lisa slurry episode of The Simpsons, where season 10, where Mr. Burns he just creates this huge net that just drains everything out of the ocean and grinds into a slurry, and then they sell it as some kind of industrial byproduct.
Right, so that's pretty much what they're doing.
Oh my god! Yeah,
except with horrifying slave labor, that wasn't in the Simpsons episode.
Oh man.
And so I don't know. I guess they've got this other guy. See, there was some photo of this guy having something was wrong with his eye, but I don't know. It's not immediately coming up here. So yeah, I don't know if his eye is just bloodshot in that one particular picture. There's this guy, like, it's just like, where do they find these Sith Lords?
Yeah, he looks exactly like Blofeld from the Bond movies, like Thunderball and whatnot, or like he's got like a bionic eye or something. This Brabeck Lamanth character.
What is going on? Yeah, I mean, the CEO of Nestle. I don't know, man. There must be like people. Like, it's a mystery school, like you were saying. So I'm sure there's people in the World Economic Forum who fathom that they're doing good. And then, but obviously, it's about, like, wielding power over the whole world, basically. And so, hopefully, this former CEO of Nestle is gonna try to do good things, and it's not like a sexist and a racist.
Yeah, hopefully, if he can just keep his hands off the office staff, he can continue his slave regime and draining money out the rest of us. But you just got to not harass the young ladies that come to work in your office, man. Is it such a tall order? I don't understand. So just a little note here. I have been reading the James Bond books, and you have too, Brian. And I was reading From Russia with Love the other day. From Russia with Love. James Bond does not make an appearance until like page 100 in From Russia with Love. The entire beginning is all about the spy agencies, the meeting of the top brass of the Soviet spy agencies. And the author of the James Bond films, this man, Ian Fleming, was a spook for the Brits during the war, right? So he has so there's a little intro to the book that says, some of the people in the exact buildings are actual people based on the actual places he had been in, like Moscow during his spy days. So like the James Bond movies are very silly. The James Bond books are kind of silly, but also based on some reality. There really are these consortiums of like robber barons who meet behind the scenes and banking elites who meet behind the scenes to make decisions, and we're all left to think that our nominal heads of state actually run the show. And it's interesting to see how there is a bit of the James Bond novels at least have one foot, in the actual experiences of Ian Fleming in the spy agencies in World War II. And it's interesting that he comes up with these, like Spectre comes out of the imagination of Ian Fleming, the secret organization run by Ernst Stavro Blofeld that owns all these corporations and manipulates foreign policy, around the world. It's really why it is funny to see just how much the World Economic Forum resembles some of these bizarre James Bond cabals. There's like a little seed of truth to the ridiculous Dr. Evil.
Yeah,
thing.
well, it's a bit of a limited hangout, right? Wherein they give you some truth, but it's obviously a bit of a propaganda effort to glorify the nature of the Secret Service. James Bond is this handsome lad who's an amazing card player and an amazing shot and whatnot, and has indispensable charisma.
Yeah, surely he wouldn't be involved in defending supply chains that have slavery in them, right? Man. All right, well, before we take a break here, Brian, I did want to dive into the exciting world of Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, the Divine Comedy is an epic poem. Right? The epic poem, like some of the most famous epic poems in history are like the Odyssey and the Iliad, which everyone knows, written by this. They started out as like oral traditions, right? So the history of the Odyssey and the Iliad disappears into the vapors of oral tradition at some point. But the author is said to be Homer, right? Homer refers to the author or authors of these epics. The Iliad tells the story of a specific episode in the tail end of the Greek destruction of the city of Troy. And then the Odyssey is the story of one man, Odysseus, one of these Greek invaders on his voyage back from the destruction of Troy, trying to find his way home. He gets lost and goes on this quintessential voyage before he finally is able to return home to Ithaca. And during the Roman Empire, shortly after the founding of the Roman Empire and the coronation of Augustus, the Roman poet Virgil the Romans borrowed a lot, for they imported much Greek culture into their own society, and part of the binding of Roman culture to Greek culture was this man Virgil, who wrote a poem about the Trojan prince Aeneas, right? And what he did after the Trojan War, which was to arrive at the Italian peninsula and start a family, and then the descendants of that family would eventually feature Romulus and Remus, the two twins who founded the city of Rome. So essentially, Virgil, the Roman poet, staples Roman history to Greek mythology, or Roman myth to Greek myth. And so then you get Dante at the end of Rome falls, you get the Middle Ages, and now you have Dante coming along, and he writes this poem And in the poem, Dante, the protagonist is him. He's speaking as if this is something that actually happened to him. And when he gives the location of like the entrance to hell, he was wandering in a wood. And he finds this entrance and he gets a tour of first hell, then purgatory, and then paradise from none other than Virgil himself, right? The man who wrote the Aeneid back after the coronation of Augustus. So now Dante is tying medieval society to Roman society, and Roman society having already tied itself to Greek society. So this is like a brief genealogy of epic poems. The Dante's Inferno, it's a great poem. It's very thick. You'll hear the Durants describe this. And it is really creepy. It is absolutely horrifying. So with all that in mind, I should now like to treat our intrepid system failure listeners to Will and Ariel Durant's comments on the Divine Comedy. Now remember, the Divine Comedy is all three. It's called the Divine Comedy because it's written in Italian versus like Latin. That's what makes it a comedy. Dante started writing this poem in Latin hexameter. Hexameter is the same way that Homer wrote and the same way that Virgil wrote. But he abandoned that and he invented this new terza rima rhyme scheme that became like the standard for Italian literature. So, without further ado, here now are the historians Will and Ariel Durant describing the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is the strangest and most difficult of all poems. No other, before yielding its treasures, makes such imperious demands. Its language is the most compact and concise this side of Horace and Tacitus. It gathers into a word or phrase contents and subtleties requiring a rich background and an alert intelligence for full apprehension. Even the wearisome theological, psychological, astronomical disquisitions have here a pithy precision that only a scholastic philosopher could rival or enjoy. Dante lived so intensely in his time that his poem almost breaks under the weight of contemporary allusions unintelligible today without a litter of notes obstructing the movement of the tale. He loved to teach and tried to pour into one poem nearly all that he had ever learned, with the result that the living verse lies abed with dead absurdities. He weakens the charm of Beatrice by making her the voice of his political loves and hates. He stops his story to denounce 100 cities or groups of individuals, and at times his epic founders in a sea of vituperation. He promises to remove the ice for a moment from the eyes of Alberigo. This is my note here. Dante meets people that he knew in Florence in the Inferno, and he assigns his political enemies horrible fates in the Inferno. And this is one of those guys, Alberigo. And the story here is that Dante encounters Alberigo, this man who he hated in real life. And Alberigo is suffering in the frozen level of hell. And Alberigo begs him to remove the ice from his eyes so he can just see for a second. He's suffering unbearable torment down there. And Dante is like, tell me a story and I'll remove that ice from your eyes. And then this is what happens. He promises to remove the ice for a moment from the eyes of Alberigo if the latter will tell his name and story. Alberigo does, and asks fulfillment. Reach hither now thy hand, open my eyes. But, says Dante, I opened them not for him. To be rude to him was a courtesy. That's pretty rude. The man's suffering in hell. You're not going to remove the ice from his eyes because you hated him in real life. Dante was bitter, as the Durants point out here. This is the great line that I wanted to get to. If a man so bitter could win a conducted tour through paradise, we shall all be saved. And that's very funny. The Durants are remarking on that Dante's this wicked, bitter dude. Why he gets a guided tour through paradise. The rest of us could do just as well. So the Durants describe everything that's wrong with the Inferno there, but now they'll describe what's great about it. His poem is nonetheless the greatest of medieval Christian books and one of the greatest of all time. The slow accumulation of its intensity through 100 cantos is an experience that no thorough reader will ever forget. It is the sincerest of poems. There is no pretense in it, no hypocrisy or false modesty, no sycophancy or cowardice. The most powerful men of the age, even a pope who claimed all power, are attacked with a force and fervor unparalleled in poetry. Above all, there is here a flight and sustainment of imagination challenging Shakespeare's supremacy. Vivid pictures of things never seen by gods or men, descriptions of nature that only an observant and sensitive spirit could achieve, and little narratives that press great tragedies into narrow space, and yet no vital matter missed. There is no humor in this man, but love was there till misfortune turned it into theology. What Dante achieves at last is sublimity. We cannot find in his epic the Mississippi of life and action that is the Iliad, nor the gentle, drowsy stream of Virgil's verse, nor the universal understanding and forgiveness of Shakespeare. But here is grandeur in a tortured, half-barbaric force that foreshadows Michelangelo. And because Dante loved order as well as liberty, and bound his passion and vision into form, he achieved a poem of such sculptured power that no man since has equaled it. Through the centuries that followed him, Italy revered him as the liberator of her golden speech. Petrarch and Boccaccio and 100 others were inspired by his battle and his art, and all Europe rang with the story of the proud exile who had gone to hell and had returned and had never smiled again. Good stuff there from the Inferno, Brian. I hope, do you think that, I guess what I should do now is just read a little excerpt from the Inferno, just to give our readers a taste of what it's like to read this poem. It's wicked short. I would like to mention here that the authoritative English version of the Inferno is translated by none other than Portland, Maine's own Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Now, Brian, you live here on Longfellow Square. There's a statue of the man just outside your window. If we just crane our necks just so we can see. And, the American poet Longfellow created a version of the Inferno. It's not the easiest to read from the modern perspective, but it's like the best English version there is. And so it is Longfellow's words that I will recount here. And just a quick note, this excerpt from the Inferno takes place when Dante and his guide Virgil have first passed the gates of the city of Nis, and so they're just going into the first top level of the Inferno now. So this is them first arriving, and I'll just keep it. I'll just read a couple of verses here because it is pretty heady. So it's starting out with Virgil talking. So it starts out with a quote here. Virgil says, "Let us descend now into the blind world," began the poet, pallid, utterly pallid, meaning he's white as a sheet, right? Even the ghost of Virgil is white. So the ghost is saying, "Let us descend now into the blind world," began the poet, pallid, utterly. "I will be first, and thou shalt second be. And I," now it's Dante describing, "and I, who of his color was aware, said, How shall I come if thou art afraid? Who art to be my comfort to my fears? And he said to me, The anguish of the people who are below here in my face depicts that pity for which terror thou hast taken." So, they're about to descend into hell, and Dante's like, dude, you look like you're terrified. Like, I'm like just a mortal. You're like a ghost. If you're the ghost of the great poet Virgil, and you're terrified, I really don't think I should be going down into hell with you. And the ghost is like, you think I'm afraid. Really, I just feel really bad for the people that you are about to encounter. And that's why I'm white as a sheet. It's super creepy. I really like that. There's a lot of great language that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow brings into the poem. And it's a real challenge for him. He has to reproduce this really complex terzo rima rhyme scheme, which is like A, B, A, B, A, B. So he has to take what Dante said and convey the meaning of it and then preserve the rhyme scheme. It's quite a job. I don't know how Henry Wadsworth Longfellow ever got through this, but it's a great book, and it's got so many layers that there's so much you can just never get to the bottom of it. You could read it and just find new things and new subtleties, and like the Durant said, new references to late medieval Florence and Italy all throughout. So anyway, I'm over the moon about this Dante's Inferno. It's wild.
Well, I guess I just don't understand the cultural significance. I mean, is it supposed to be like some kind of reflection of, or is it just it's just like the history of Florence is like intertwined with it? Or
it's a strange juxtaposition. It's a mixture of like history. It's like late medieval Italian politics, but also a Platonic conception of ascent through parallel spheres, right? The idea of the ascent out of Plato's cave is this Platonic idea of the ascent. There's many versions of it in the Greco-Roman theater prior to Christianity becoming a state religion of the Roman Empire. Right? You've got your Gnosticism, you've got your Neoplatonism, you've got your Hermeticism, you've got Christianity. All of these emphasize an ascent, right? Plato's Ascent. These are all Platonic. Every one of these is heavily influenced by Platonism. But when Christianity becomes the state religion of the Roman Empire, only one flavor of Platonism is allowed, and that's, of course, Christianity, which stresses the way that you improve, the way that you ascend between, parallel realms is through moral improvement, right? Versus alchemy, or Hermeticism, which might say that the way that you ascend between spheres is not through moral improvement, but through technical improvement, like you get better at a skill, right? The great work, the magnum opus. So this idea of the ascent through parallel spheres, it took over medieval cosmology, both in the state-sanctioned Christian version of like ascension between parallel realms, and in the underground magical Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism that would all reemerge during the Renaissance as Renaissance magic. So the point here is that Dante formalized the pre-scientific revolution, the cosmology of spheres, where it's not just the level, it's not just that there's layers to hell, right? There's also layers to heaven. Each layer is a planet, right? The medieval people knew about Mercury and Venus and Jupiter and Saturn and Mars, and the sun and the moon, and these were the layers in heaven, right? And they reflect the layers in the Inferno. There's a similarity there. So this was a formalization of cosmology, both the Christian Platonistic cosmology and the underground magic cosmology of the Middle Ages. Does that make sense?
Well, so are the people in the lower circles of hell, are they in the lower circles of hell because of their technical damnation or technical inability, I guess? And then, and does it provide, are the people in the higher levels of heaven, does it explain how these people got that way, I guess, and what to do to avoid damnation? So
even though it's a reflection of all medieval cosmology, it has a Christian layer. The top layer is Christian, so the church doesn't, this is the time when the church was all powerful, right? When Dante's writing this poem, he can't be winking, he can't be too obvious about the pre-Christian paganism that informs this worldview. Christianity is also a derivative of pre-Christian paganism, but the Christian emperors of Rome burnt all the pre-Christian material, trying to make Christianity the only game in town, the only spiritual. They wanted to enforce a spiritual monopoly. And so Dante's poem is it's like the Christian flavor of the medieval Platonistic, cosmology. So the people are sorted in the levels of the Inferno according to the seriousness of their crime. So the Inferno reflects a Augustinian moral improvement, right? You are lower in the circles of hell depending on how bad your crime is. Example, the top layer of hell is people who didn't do any crime at all. They're just unbaptized, right? Virgil says he belongs here because he's a pre-Christian pagan. Right? He's Roman, but he wrote his poem before Christianity became a thing. And so the Inferno reflects that Augustinian moral order. The lower levels of hell are reserved for the people of the most serious crimes. And on one level, people who do divination, there are certain kinds of Renaissance magic that Dante is careful to demonize, right? But it's just important to notice the people who work magic in a way that's unacceptable to the church are heretics that belong in the Inferno somewhere. But there are plenty of miracles that are sanctioned by the state, like saints do miracles, the miracles in the Bible. Miracles are just some miracles are sanctioned by the state and are allowed and will not land you in the Inferno, right? And then other types of miracles will land you in the Inferno based on based on the political order of the day. So, did I answer your question there? It is the short answer is the Divine Comedy reflects a cosmology where ascent is a moral project versus a technical one.
Okay, and so it sounds like it lands more on being the moral. I mean, it sounds like the story is mostly tainted then by the Christians' state at the time. Yes. It's in a Christian version of the medieval Platonistic cosmology, and it's officially in the church. It's something that it's not something that the church would have considered a heresy at the time. It's even though it flirts with, it has all these magical influences, right? But Christianity too, right? We said it. Number 33 is the age of Jesus during the crucifixion. It's always the age at which the sun god gets crucified. It's just that the church doesn't want to admit the pagan influences on Christianity. They want it to be a revelation from God, not something that arose from existing traditions. So it's like competing Platonism and the Platonism of the past were all heresies. But as long as you couched what you were saying in the Christian conception of the authorities, you were golden to describe a Platonistic
ascent, a Platonistic mythic ascent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sort of the glorification of the story probably had something to do with it being, state sanctioned tale.
Yeah. Well, it made sense to the Catholics living in Italy at the time. I think I may have even brought up last week, but Terence McKenna, the ethnobotanist, always has this story about how the Holy Roman Empire in the 13th century was like very buttoned down. People weren't as nearly as superstitious or crazy about magic in the sense that they just believed what the state told them. But then in the 14th century, things start to go wrong in the medieval world. And people start not believing the authorities so much, and then you get a explosion in the popularity of magic that heretofore was a heresy and not allowed at all. And then the Inquisitions are a response to that. Yeah. So, but before all of that, though, you had Dante just crystallizing this medieval cosmology, iterating it in the authoritative final way before the Middle Ages gives way to the dawning of the modern era.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think now the time to take a little break, Brian. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the Golden Age of Piracy. And we're back. Okay, so in lieu of a podcast this week, I stumbled upon a Reddit thread, as mentioned at the top of the pod, that jumped out to me because it mentions the Treaty of Westphalen, one of the craziest treaties of all time. Though it's the treaty that gave rise to the modern world made of nation states as we comprehend it today. Right? The Treaty of Westphalen, officially banished marked the end of the medieval order, where the Pope is the power behind the crowned heads of Christendom, and sober history is just that. While that was the end of that was the nominal heads of state took over after the Treaty of Westphalen, and that's still who rules us today. Of course, the sober normal view of history leaves out the rise of the shadowy banking cabals, modeled on the mystery schools of Greece and Rome, and on the Catholic Church, which itself was modeled off the mystery schools of Greece and Rome, and gave rise to the kind of shadowy banking cabals we talked about in the first half with respect to the World Economic Forum here. So this is a Today I Learned Reddit thread, and the TIL is, today I learned that the age of piracy only lasted around 80 years. It started in 1648 after the Treaty of Westphalia pushed European powers to hire privateers, and declined between 1714 and 1723. When the War of Spanish Succession ended, Nassau was retaken, and every famous pirate had been killed or captured. Here's a couple of dates for you. Henry Morgan died in 1688 of natural causes. Blackbeard died in 1718 in battle. Charles Vane died in 1721 by hanging. Jack Rackham died in 1720 by hanging. Black Bart died in 1722 in battle. Jack Ward, a.k.a. Jack the Sparrow, died in his home in 1622 at the age of 17. And Grace O'Malley, a female pirate, died in her home in 1603 at the age of 70. Interesting. The Grace O'Malley and Jack Sparrow come before the Treaty of Westphalen. But the point here, it's interesting to me. There's a delay, right? The Treaty of Westphalen set up the modern conception of politics, where every square inch of the planet, not Antarctica, but every other square inch of the planet, belongs inside the borders of someone's country. Right? The Treaty of Westphalen established international borders with this specific idea that agents of the Pope would no longer be able to cross those international borders and influence the politics in other countries, a.k.a. countries like Czechia, who wanted to be Protestant, would be allowed to be Protestant without fear of interference from the Vatican. Right? That's what the Treaty of Westphalen decided, but obviously there's the implications for the oceans are interesting, right? Because the oceans don't have borders on them. There's I think that each country's territory extends a mile or two offshore, and that's about it. So you have these oceans, and the way that military conflicts are drawn up in the post-Westphalian world order are, of course, it's not like if an American ship captures a German ship during World War II and seizes that ship and takes all the prisoners captive. Well, that's just part of war. That's just part of the rules of engagement, the rules of war in which nations interact with each other. Right? But what you can't have is a ship that doesn't have a flag of a country taking merchant ships as a prize, like the Somali pirates. Right? They're not flying under a national flag, so what they're doing is considered piracy. And in the shipping lanes of the of the 17th century, right? That was the big rule. Right? You can't be taking prizes unless you're flying unless you're specifically authorized as part of a military of one of these countries. Those are the only people that are legitimately allowed to declare war, right? And so it was a hanging offense. It was a really big deal if you seized merchant ships without having a flag flying. And that was why it was really important for guys like Sir Francis Drake to make sure he had letters of marque from the Queen. The letters of marque made him a privateer, so he could fly the British flag, and he'd be properly authorized to seize merchant ships. It wouldn't be hung as a pirate by whatever authority he encountered on the high seas, including the British authority. They'd be bound to hang him as a pirate if he didn't have the proper letters of marque. Right? So this makes sense that the age of piracy, there'd be a brief age of piracy. You impose the Treaty of Westphalen, and then you have to also impose it on the high seas. You have to go out there and get rid of all the privateers and make it so that the crowned heads of Europe all have control over the shipping lanes, right? So you just have this, after the Treaty of Westphalen, you just have this era of piracy. So it makes sense from that perspective, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so that privateer fellow, the one you just mentioned.
Francis Drake, yeah.
I mean, so he probably got captured by the Spanish or something, right?
I don't think Francis Drake ever did get captured by the Spanish. I think he successfully captured Spanish ships his whole career and charted the west coast of South America. And I think he eventually died did he die somewhere? I might be mixing him up with Captain Cook now. Died out there in the Pacific somewhere. I can't remember what ultimately became of Sir Francis Drake, but I think he has to be considered the world's most famous pirate, with his privateer status and the ongoing conflict between the English and the Spanish there.
All right. Well, obviously, though, governments want the shipping lanes to be largely under control.
Yes. Yeah.
And they want to know where the skirmishes are happening and have it be against another state power, and having other forces outside of that messing with things is like a problem for. It's a problem for both, Spain and England, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You're really getting close to the heart of the matter there, Brian. It's like, we want the system. We're like the international system was very young in the days after the decades after the Treaty of Westphalen, and we weren't sure if that was the system that we would adopt into modernity. But the crowned heads of Christendom wanted that system and not some other system, right? They wanted us to be separated into different countries and different flags, and to obey the kings and queens of those different countries and have that be it. So you had to. It's essentially. Forcing this world. It's just like the Cold War, capitalism versus communism, right? We want the way forward to be. We want the future to be capitalist, not communist, right? So there's an ideological, battle here. There's an attempt to impose the international system. They successfully imposed it, right? By the end of the 1600s, you had the first banking house, the Bank of England, like less than 50 years after the Treaty of Westphalen. You have the rise of the Bank of England, and then a few years after that, you get, of course, the Freemasons rising in London, just less than 20 years after the founding of the Bank of England. And that brings us back to pirates and the famous skull and crossbones. Because you see, I mentioned mystery schools at the top here. Because Christianity, based on the mystery schools of Greece and Rome, for the longest time within Christianity, only the clergy could read, so they were able to keep the contents of the Bible secret and just mete out the crumbs that were economically convenient for them to the flock, to the people that came to church, right? So you wouldn't be allowed, as a medieval peasant, you wouldn't be allowed to read the Bible. You just have to take the word of the local priest on what the Bible said. And in that sense, it was a mystery school. And the coming of the printing press and the printing of Bibles in Vulgate languages, in non-Latin languages people could actually understand, blew up the mystery school of the church, blew up the power of the Roman Catholic Church over Europe, and that was the end of their epoch of power, the end of the medieval era over which the church ruled, right? And in its place, and the banks that arose to replace the popes at the top of the international hierarchy, they kept the mystery school structure. You can see it in Davos with those colored lanyards people wear around their necks, right? There's different layers, and you have to work your way into the inner circle to find out what's really going on, to be let into to have the curtain raised, to be let in on what's really going on. And because we still live in a mystery school structure where we're not allowed to know who really runs things over and above the nominal heads of state that we're supposed to believe in, because of that, we don't have an accurate view of history. So that brings me back to the Knights Templar. We have to go all the way back to the Crusades, which began in 1095. The Knights Templar, of course, were a order of warrior monks, Brian. The scam was pretty simple, right? Traveling from London or Paris to Jerusalem, it's like a dangerous thing to do. There's brigands and cutthroats, who infest the highway to the Holy Land, right? So the idea was
a journey fraught with danger.
That's it. Yes, that's it. So the idea was, okay, well, I don't want to carry a bag of coins with me. I need to be able to eat on my way to Jerusalem, but I don't want to carry all my wealth with me because I'm just going to get robbed on the way there. So what do? You go to the Temple Church, the Knights Templars headquarters there. It still stands on Fleet Street in London to this day. And you trade in your bag of coins for a letter of credit. And you take that letter of credit with you. That letter of credit is useless to the brigands on the highway to Jerusalem. But to you, it's useful because when you get to Jerusalem, you can visit the other Temple Church in Jerusalem. And you can trade in your letter of credit for coins again. You see how that works?
Right.
Yeah. Now, exchange rates. You're not going to get back your full dollar. You're not going to. You put $100. Let's say you put 100 gold coins in the Temple Bank in London. When you get to Jerusalem, they're going to give you back 95 or something like that, right? Because they're going to need a little fee for their service. It makes sense. So what you're really doing there is charging interest, right? Interest is illegal. The Catholic Church forbids the charging of interest through the whole Middle Ages. After the fiasco of the fall of Rome, debt got a pretty bad name. So the church is like, no lending money. Taking interest is bad. The Knights, they weren't really charging interest, but they kind of were. You can see how the currency exchange could kind of work just like an interest rate would, and the Knights acquired a ton of money. So now the Knights are super rich. And a little sidebar on the Knights here. You've heard this thing, Brian. I assume that the Knights found something. The Knights Templar are called the Knights Templar because they set up their headquarters on the ruins of the Second Temple, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, the one destroyed by Titus. In 79 AD, the Romans came in and just wiped out Jerusalem, and that was one of the big impetuses that spread, the Jewish inhabitants of Palestine then they had to flee to like Spain or to Eastern Europe or other places around the world because of the Roman occupation and oppression. Well, that Second Temple, apparently where the Knights would set up their headquarters, 1,000 years after the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, the Knights reportedly found something of unimaginable value in the undercroft of the old Temple of Solomon there. That's the rumor, right? And the rumor is that they found the Holy Grail. So the Knights Templar figure into Grail legends now. Now here's where things get really strange, Brian. I do not know what to make of this, but for whatever reason, magical artifacts like the Holy Grail seem to pop up around major moments in history that involve the history of finance. I have one other example. That's a pretty heady generalization, but the Ark of the Covenant also works in this way, right? In the first temple, before the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant, obviously, the Jews had it in Jerusalem. That was the holy object at the center of their worship. It was supposed to contain the holy fire of the gods. We all remember this from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, right, Brian? They open up the Ark of the Covenant, and the Nazi guys their faces all melt, because it's supposed to.
Well, that's a fake ark, though, right?
In Indiana Jones, is it a fake ark?
I mean, I think so. It's not supposed to be the actual one, right? Isn't that the whole point of the ending scene in the warehouse? There's a whole bunch of these things in it.
So that's an interesting. My interpretation is that only the true Ark of the Covenant could melt the faces off the Nazis, but that the U.S. government stored it in their warehouse with all the other mystical, magical artifacts of history to be buried and never brought up again. That's kind of how I interpreted it.
Well, anyway, so the Ark of the Covenant, though, it's supposed to be this object that holds the fire of God in any case, right? Yeah. It's not like a document in there or something.
It's supposed to have the crumbled remains of the Ten Commandments and a couple other strange magical artifacts, too, like a mystical rod, like the rod of Aaron. That also figures into the Grail legend. This rod, remember Moses' brother Aaron? Like the rod, remember Moses threw his staff on the ground in front of Pharaoh and it turned into a snake? This was supposed to be one of Moses' demonstrations of God's powers, insisting the Pharaoh let him go. This rod that turns into the snake, it figures into the Grail legend when Joseph of Arimathea supposedly shows up with the Grail and a staff that flowers magically in England. That has to do with Glastonbury Abbey, the supposed resting place of King Arthur. But so the Ark is supposed to contain some magical artifacts. That's what it supposedly contains. And now here's the part that really gets my goat. I just don't know what to make of this. The last time the Bible mentions the Ark of the Covenant is Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and destruction of Jerusalem in the early goings of the 6th century BC. Right? The Ark is lost in Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem. Maybe Nebuchadnezzar takes the Ark with him back to Babylon. One thing is for sure, he takes a bunch of Jews with him as slaves, right? War prizes. And there, the Jews learn about this whole idea of the debt forgiveness and how in Babylonian society, you got to wipe the debts clean every so often to avoid societal collapse. And then, of course, the sequel to this story is that the Neo-Babylonians, whose king is Nebuchadnezzar, are destroyed by Darius and the Persians a few years later, and they liberate the Jews and send the Jews who were war prizes back to Jerusalem, where they create the Temple of Solomon. This is the second temple of Solomon, right? Nehemiah, the biblical book of Nehemiah tells the story. This is when the Jewish Bible, the Pentateuch, kind of takes shape, and into that book they bake all of these commands for debt forgiveness that later would be of great interest to Jesus during the debt troubles of the Roman Empire. So you have this moment where, the very moment when debt forgiveness technology, ancient debt forgiveness technology, makes its way into Judaism, and just at that moment, it's the last time we see the Ark of the Covenant. And then later, you have the Knights Templar reintroducing banking to Christendom through their letters of credit scheme they've got running during the Crusades. And they're supposed to have found this Holy Grail. It's really strange that so many that these like really important moments in the history of finance also have magical artifacts that pop up. They just are woven into the story. Could just be a giant coincidence, but I always wonder why that would be. Interesting piece there.
Well, see, I guess what I'm unclear on is the connection to piracy.
I'm so glad you asked. We're getting there. The Knights Templar had a couple of the one thing they had that everyone recognizes is the white tunic with the red cross on it. There's during the recent election of the Pope, there's like this they're like ex-motorcycle bikers and they're like tough guys who wear these old Templar clothes, and they act as like the guard who defends the Pope. They're just kind of there to help other people. They're just kind of there as part of the pageantry along with the Swiss Guard. So it's interesting to see the Knights Templar tunic still making their appearance at the Vatican. But the Knights Templar, in addition to that famous white tunic with the red cross, have a couple of symbols that distinguish them. One famous symbol is the two riders on a single horse. The idea is that the Knights had some kind of a vow of poverty or something. They took a vow of poverty. They didn't want to flaunt their wealth. They wanted to keep their wealth secret, so they were so parsimonious with their arms that sometimes they used a single horse for two knights. I think it's a symbol for the ratio between egos and bodies not being 1-to-1. We can get into magical symbolism some other time. I really want to focus on the financial aspect of the Knights Templar. And the other thing that the Knights Templar were famous for is burying their knights with their legs crossed. And so the symbol on a Templar grave would, of course, be a skull and two crossed thigh bones. Now we have the skull and crossbones. See, the idea, obviously, we all know that Venice was a great merchant power during the early, during the Renaissance and beyond. But they really got their start during the Crusades. The Venetians built these huge arsenals, and they built effective warships, and they were critical. They were a critical piece of the voyage of pilgrims and troops to the Holy Land. So the Venetians are involved in shipping people from Italy, to Jerusalem to lay siege to the Holy Land. And the idea here is that in 1309, the Pope and the King of France cracked down on the Knights Templar, and the King of France had fallen into terrible debt to the Knights. That's just what happens when you have a banking operation. Eventually, people fall into debt to it. And so we all remember Order 99 from Star Wars, where everyone got orders from the Emperor to kill all the Jedi, kill the Jedi Council.
Isn't it Order 66?
You're right, Order 66. I got my numbers wrong there. I'm glad someone's checking me here, Brian. On Friday, October the 13th, 1309, all the crowned heads of Christendom awoke to unsealed orders that compelled them to arrest the Knights Templar and for horrible perversions, terrible perversions like buggery, and heresy and obscenities against God. Bizarre claims, and then they tortured them to extract confessions and seized all the wealth of the Templars. But when they did this, the idea here is that they didn't get their hands on the merchant fleets that were out to sea, right? The Knights Templars, in addition to controlling the pilgrim trails, came to control shipping lanes, from Western Europe to Jerusalem. And so the idea is that these ships continued with the Knights Templar symbol of the skull with the two crossbones, the symbol that they were to prey on, legitimately flagged ships as a way of striking back for the oppression that they, the idea is that you just have a secret fleet with the skull and cross. Those are the rumors. Now, I mean, if you look it up, you're like, well, did the Knights Templar really bury their dead with, with crossed legs? Maybe that's the stuff of legend. Maybe not. But we don't get we're talking about secret societies here, mystery schools. And so we don't have a good, it's like, it doesn't really matter whether the Knights Templar actually buried their dead with crossed legs. What matters is that they got the reputation for it, right? So So, like, we're talking about myth and legend here, and the myths and legends of like the early 1300s. By the time you get to like the 1600s, people don't realize that these are myth and legends, right? The myth is real, the legend is real, even if the myth and the legend started out as apocryphal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there's all this speculation that the Knights Templar forced underground by the Pope and by the King of France, and then they existed there as a secret underground society for quite some time. Historians like Barbara Tuchman, who is a famed historian from the 20th century, or Winston Churchill, who most famously was a politician, but also was a historian on the side. He wrote about the Knights Templar. He wrote about the secret society underground in England in the later part of the 1300s that gave rise to the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. So let me just read Winston Churchill's little excerpt here. I think that will provide some nice flavor. Hang on one second here. Yeah, so here's Winston Churchill's quote from his book, The Birth of Britain. Throughout the summer of 1381, there was a general ferment. Beneath it all lay organization. Agents moved around the villages of central England, in touch with a great society which was said to meet in London. The spark of rebellion was being fanned vigorously, and finally the signal was given. Right. The background here is that after the Pope cracks down on the Knights Templar, that's 1309. In the 1340s, you get the Black Death. Right? Decimates a third to a half of all the people in Europe. And now the peasants find that they've got the lords over a barrel for the first time in history. Right? They're like, well, hey, hang on a second. Rather than swearing fealty to this one feudal lord, I could play one feudal lord off against another in a bidding war for my labor, right? And that way I can get myself a raise at the expense of the aristocracy. This is the beginning of the unraveling of the medieval economic order. The English Parliament responded with laws to try to fix the price of goods and labor, to try to prevent the lords. The aristocracy was used to like giving orders. They were not used to receiving demands. They don't entertain demands, and they didn't take it well. So they tried to enforce at sword point the wages they had previously been used to paying, and that is really the thing that led to the discontent of the Peasants' Revolt. You got to picture 100,000 peasants marching on London, right? And the worst part about it is you got King William II. He's like 12 years old or something. He's just become king. He's got no way to deal with this. Eventually, they managed to sort out the peasant rebellion, and its ringleader, a guy named Wat Tyler, was killed. It's interesting that Winston Churchill and Barbara Tuchman make reference to a secret society operating after the suppression of the Knights Templar, but before the rise of the Freemasons, operating in England here as the century is about to turn over from the 1300s to the 1400s. Okay, so that sets the table for the Knights Templar. We've already talked about the rise of the Freemasons, which occurred, just after the creation of the first bank in England. Just a couple years later in 1717, you get this group saying, "Okay, we are the Freemasons. We have a lot of the symbols, the legendary symbols of the Knights Templar. There's like one of the 33 degrees in Freemasonry is like called Knight Templar. They borrow a lot of the symbology. Skull and Crossbones is another one. You may have heard, Brian, of the Russell Trust or the Skull and Bones Society that meets at Yale that guys like George H.W. Bush got inducted into. It's in that movie The Good Shepherd with Robert De Niro and Matt Damon, which talks about the OSS becoming the CIA in the 40s.
Some questionable initiation rites.
Yeah. You remember Matt Damon had to dress up as a woman and do this weird play, and then he had to get initiated into the strange Skull and Bones ceremony that has a lot of the same imagery of like Masonic initiation rituals, like circumambulation. We talked last week about the Black Kaaba, around which Muslim pilgrims on the Hajj circumambulate. Right, that's part of both the Skull and Bones and the initiation rituals for the Freemasons. So the question here, is there a direct line? Are the Freemasons just the reemergence of the Knights Templar after their horrific persecution in 1309? Or are the Freemasons a new secret society that just co-ops the culture of the the Knights Templar that came before, right? So the question is it one continuous line, or does one inspire the next? Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it's a bit of splitting hairs in any case, right?
That's the point I was driving at. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. What really matters here is that just after the Treaty of Westphalen, you get this age of piracy where you have these merchant ships maybe related to the old fleets of the Knights Templar, maybe not, with their skull and bones. And you just had this 80-year period where ships that don't have a country are preying on merchant vessels in like the Caribbean, and it's like a big problem. And the heads of state have to get control of that as the banking institutions seize control of the burgeoning industrial revolution. So these pirates are supposed to be like Knights Templar then, or Freemasons maybe, or something. There is some kind of genealogy. Yeah, there is some kind of genealogy going from pirates back to the Knights Templar that connects them to the Freemasons and the secret societies / mystery schools that still operate our international economy to this day. Let's see. I think we've got it all mentioned here. The only other piece, there's two more pieces of this story that should be mentioned. One, England. Why England, right? King Richard II was the King of England when the Pope issued his orders to arrest all the Templars. And Richard II got his order to arrest all the Knights Templar in England, and he was like, wow, geez. The Knights Templar are really, they do a lot of political donations for me. Like, their wealth is like, I'm kind of an ally of theirs. Yeah, I really can't see, I really don't believe that they're like, engaged in perversions and devil worship. So we kind of dragged his feet on on carrying out the Pope's orders, right? In France, right, obviously in Paris, this was all King Philip IV. This was his idea. He had been critical in getting Pope Clement V onto the throne of St. Peter. So Clement V owed him a favor. So this is all King Philip's idea. So he didn't hesitate at all to crack down on the Knights Templar. That's why they arrested the head of the Knights Templar in France, a guy named Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, tortured him, and then they destroyed the Temple Church that was in Paris, right? The Temple Church in London still stands on Fleet Street, but the one in Paris is gone since 1309 because King Philip destroyed it. But it's Richard II's hesitation, right? He dragged his feet and allowed the Knights Templar to escape underground in England.
What year was this approximately?
1309. It was Black Friday.
Okay.
Obviously, Friday the 13th is in October, so Friday the 13th, October 1309. Richard II's like, man, I really don't want to persecute these Knights Templar. They're good friends of mine. A couple months later, the Pope forces the issue by publishing a papal bull officially condemning the Knights Templar. Now, Richard has no choice. But all of his friends, the Knights Templar, have a heads up, so they just have an ability to disappear underground. Fascinatingly, this papal bull was not even published in Scotland. Like, the Scots were like, nuts to this papal bull. They didn't even publish it, so people didn't even know about it. And that is why Richard II, King William III, King William II, Richard II, then the next king was King William II. Remember the 10-year-old kid who put down the Peasants' Revolt? And then you have his successor, King William III, who needs to fund a war with France now, and he's going to borrow. This is after the Treaty of Westphalen. Now he's going to borrow money from a consortium of 40 London and Edinburgh bankers, right? And then that's going to be the world's first central bank, and the British pound will be the world's first reserve currency run by bankers. It's very interesting.
He borrowed the money from the Knights Templar or some derivative organization thereof.
He borrowed it from an organization of 40 bankers, some from Edinburgh and some from London. It's just interesting to note that London and Edinburgh are the very places where King William's predecessor, Richard II, had not persecuted the Knights a couple centuries before. Yeah, so it's like, it's no coincidence. There's a reason that this, to me, my thesis here is that the shipping empire that was the British Empire that we recognize was localized in Britain specifically because King Richard dragged his feet on stamping out the Knights Templar, right? Those proto-bankers went underground, bided their time, fomented the Peasants' Revolt, and then later emerged after the Treaty of Westphalen to take control of the British crown by getting control of the issuance of its currency. That in 1694, and then in 1717, you've got these people saying, okay, we're going to officially have a lodge in London and announce ourselves as the Freemasons. Also interesting to note that many of these, so the consortium of merchants, like the first governor of the Bank of England was a Freemason, of course. It's not a coincidence. So there's definitely some strange connections here that go back to the foundation of the societies, the international order that arose in the late Middle Ages to replace the Middle Ages with the Industrial Revolution sort of society we live in today.
I guess what I would think is that you would think that the Knights Templar or the Skull and Bones would be excited about the Treaty of Westphalia because it represents, diminished power for the Catholic Church that tried to exterminate them. But so they're, harvesting these merchant ships. But then they get cracked down as a result of the Treaty of Westphalia, though, ultimately by these state powers.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And an important clarifying question. I don't think that Blackbeard was under orders from the Bank of England to do what he was doing. I just think that they used the black flag, but because by then the symbol of an extra national military force was the skull and crossbones. So I think they just I don't really know. I don't really know for sure that the Knights Templar and the Freemasons share an explicit link. But one thing is for sure, the Freemasons took all the symbolism and all the imagery of the Knights Templar and made it their own.
Well, the privateer, I forget his name again.
Francis Drake.
So he's probably the most infamous one, right? And he was a privateer sanctioned by the government of England.
Yeah,
to
so he was not
accost the Spanish.
Exactly. So he was not a pirate. He avoided piracy. He flew the flag of England. The white flag with the red cross back then. He flew the flag of England because he had a letter of marque from Queen Elizabeth, even though he was not. It essentially made him part of the British military, part of the British Navy, versus being a privateer with no. I guess he was a privateer, but authorized to be a part of the British Navy.
Well, he's some kind of pirate guy who's been co-opted by the state.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So like Francis, I think it's the case that the Spanish wanted to hang him as a pirate, but he was like, "Oh, I've got these letters of marque. What I'm doing is totally legal," and I think that was the controversy of the day.
All right.
Yeah. Yes. All right. One other thread to tie up here, Brian, and that is of John Wycliffe. Do you remember John Wycliffe, the communist preacher who took his life in the late part of the 1300s in England? He was his whole thing was he blew off the church and started translating the Bible into English, and he got in a lot of trouble. And the church eventually condemned him as a heretic, but he had the good sense to die before the church could burn him. He just died of old age by the time the church brought down the hammer on him. And so John Wycliffe was living in the era of the Peasants' Revolt and the general unhappiness with the ruling class in England, during that time. And John Wycliffe was very influential on Jan Hus, the Czech preacher, who also wanted to have the Bible translated into common languages, And for him, he did not have the good sense to die before the church could get its claws on him. The church summoned him to a church. They summoned him to, was it Mainz? I can't remember where they summoned him to some church meeting in Germany and then burnt him at the stake. And that pissed off the people living in Prague. The Bohemians were so incensed by that they started... That they carried out the first defenestration of Prague at the new town square, chucking Catholic administrators out the window, and beginning the Protestant Reformation there. They ignited the flame that would eventually become the Inferno of the Protestant Reformation and consume the church. So there are seeds of that. You can see that there are the way that the Great Age changed from the medieval feudal structure to the modern international capitalist structure. Well, the Golden Age of Piracy figures heavily into that story, both going into the future and extrapolating backwards into the past.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think just looking at my notes here that is pretty much everything that I can think of to bring up with respect to the Knights Templar. But as you can tell, that Reddit thread really excited me. It stirred up all the things that really interest me about secret histories and living in a structure where information is managed like a mystery school. It really speaks to the heart of the flim-flam that's at the core of class relations. No, really interesting. It's the version of history we're given doesn't quite give the right. They just leave certain things out so that you get a very different view of what's been going on than what actually has been going on.
Like the Wild West is famously, and they were talking about in the Reddit thread, a relatively short period that is harkened back to in fiction and whatnot, and idolized maybe. The Age of Piracy, it sounds like a brutish time. There's the age of the internet in our modern time, right? Mm. So we had a good 10 years maybe from 99 to 2009-ish where the internet was not a state sanctioned place. And it was probably a lot better, or at least inflicted a lot less brain rot on the mass populace. But now it's under corporate control, which is like espoused to be for our benefit, but the brain rot, though, is through the roof.
Well, hang on. Just a little point of order. I feel like it's a battleground still with the censorious forces of capitalism winning many victories in like the 2010s and up till now. But I agree that like places on the internet that are reserved for free expression or that feel like the internet, the Wild West internet that you're talking about, that territory seems to be shrinking. But I just feel like the battle's still going on, even though it's been mostly lost.
It is, there's battle lines and there's skirmishes happening. And so places like Reddit, which used to be not make me feel like I was kind of off myself, now do if you go on too many Reddit threads. But I guess like podcasting's obviously a noble frontier, and it's hard to control people's individual voices and having an opinion. Yeah,
podcasting's a big one. Seems like though the conservative forces of corporatism try to put out their podcast, no one wants to hear those. They want to hear the freewheeling, uncensored versions.
So I don't know. I guess like the corporate control is like glorified, but it's maybe questionable. But I guess it's complicated, like you were saying, with these various factions vying for power, and then the narratives that kind of get passed down to the plebes are like a separate matter from the actual truth, I guess. Right?
Yeah, we're left to deracinate, the propaganda from the reality.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I feel completely exhausted, Brian. I was wildly excited about the Knights Templar and the Freemasons and the rise of banking, and now I feel quite spent. But I had a good time with today's podcast. I hope you did too. And I think that this is usually the moment when I exhort our intrepid system failure audience to head on over to systemfailure.org. There you can read the weekly essays written by yours truly on these sorts of topics. This week's essay will be on, of course, Dante's Inferno. You can find that over at systemfailure.org. And should you want to get in touch with either Brian or myself, you can find us there at systemfailure.org. All you must do is click on the About page and then click on the name of the name and face of the person you wish to contact. You can send us a message that way. We hope to see you all online this week, folks. Have a good one.
Alrighty.